The Celts definitely looked at coin art in a different way compared to their neighbors. The Romans were very uptight with their coins. They were primarily objects of statecraft, of political propaganda. The Greeks maybe had a slightly more pious way of handling it. You will see more of their pantheon, of their mythology, and less of their kings and leaders. But the Celts, these guys were artists, and their coins are these wonderful, wild-looking pieces of crazy abstraction. We need to be careful when talking about the Celts. Are we talking about the Gauls, the Britons, the Celtiberians? There are many flavors of Celtic peoples. They were very fractured politically, but many of these people had certain cultural and especially artistic commonalities between them, especially from the 5th to the 1st centuries BC, the final period of Celtic history before they were conquered by the Romans. We call this period the Latin culture. It must have been a crime to make anything with straight lines in the Latin culture, because they absolutely loved curved designs, from their jewelry to their swords to their shields, and the images on the coins they put. It's all absolutely full of circles, of swirls, of images of animals in very organic shapes, and elements of nature in general. Every tiny bit of available space on their coins was decorated, was filled to the brim with intricacies and abstract designs that give it its super unique look. But don't you get the wrong idea about the Celts. They were not all form and no function. I know this is a channel dedicated to coins, but it's important to mention the Celts invented some of the best military equipment of their time. The Roman legionary, the best heavy infantryman of the ancient world, had much of its equipment based on Celtic gear. The gladius, very famous gladius, a short sword carried by every Roman soldier, was copied from a type of short sword used by the Celtiberians in Spain. The lorica hamata, the chainmail that they also used for protection, was most likely adapted from a similar design worn by the Gauls that lived in the north of the Italian peninsula during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. It might not have been the Gauls who first invented the chainmail, but the Romans most likely got their idea of equipment from the Gauls, as the other major influence they had for military equipment, which was the Greeks in the south, they preferred other types of armor. So back to coins. Today we're looking at coins from the 1st century BC, from the areas of modern-day northeast France, Belgium, and southern England. These pieces are all, how may I put it, descendants of the first gold coins to widely circulate in this area, gold staters, struck by Philip II of Macedon. Philip hired the entire armies of Celtic mercenaries to fight on his campaigns to unify Greece, and he paid for his troops with coins, of course. When the mercenaries came back to Gaul, these coins began circulating there. They became so popular that the locals decided to strike their own copies. This type just kept being copied over and over and over in Celtic lands for centuries. So centuries of making copies of previous copies with the added artistic influences native to Gaul and the Latin culture in general. You know, the swirly and highly intricate art I mentioned early, and this resulted in these incredible, abstract-looking coins with a Celtic flavor to them. So I think it's actually a good idea for us, before we jump into the Celtic coins, to start with the initial prototype of these coins, the gold stater of Philip of Macedon. Here's an example of one of such coins. On the obverse, we have a bust of the god Apollo, wearing a laurel crown, looking to the right. Pay particular attention to the very curly hair on Apollo's head. This will give rise to some pretty dramatic abstractions. On the reverse, we have a chariot being pulled by 2 horses. Wonderful dynamic scene here, with the horses dashing forward with their front legs up in the air. The charioteer on the back is holding for dear life to his chariot, so he isn't thrown back, and he raises a whip to control the horses. Under the design, we have the word Filippo, meaning of Philip, issued by Philip, something of the type. Basically a statement under which authority this coin was issued under. Okay, we have a reference of the prototype, so now let's see how the Celts reinterpreted this design. Let's begin in Gaul, with the tribe of the Suessiones. This tribe was located at the southern border of what Julius Caesar called the Gallia Belgica. He claimed this region had the bravest and most fearsome of all Gallic warriors due to their distance of the civilizing influence of the Mediterranean nations and their proximity and constant war with the Germans across the Rhine. The Suessiones were subdued by Caesar in 57 BC after he besieged their capital. They had a remarkably complex monetary system with coins of base metals, silver, and these lovely gold staters. This one was issued between 60 and 25 BC, and as we will see in detail now, centuries of copying the original Macedonian design resulted in some pretty wild art. On the obverse, we see the face of Apollo has degenerated into a mess of circles. It's like if the camera angle from the original design was changed, and now we're looking at Apollo from above. Notice the stylized nose between the two eyes. The hair and the laurel wreath, I think they disappeared, being replaced by a wing at the top part of the design. This is a clear example of high degree abstraction of the original design. We will see in some other coins that the process of abstraction wasn't as advanced, but here in this one, almost nothing of the original design is left. There's just a loose concept of what the original design was meant to be. And here, the typical curvy visual elements of the Latin culture are taking over the design. Super cool. Now the reverse. We have a horse galloping to the left. This horse is all that is left from the original chariot design. It probably did not degenerate into abstract shapes because, well, horses were pretty well known by the Gauls. In fact, later in the Imperial Roman period, the Romans would commonly employ native Gallic cavalry in their armies as they were such good horsemen. One of the wheels of the chariot is also represented here, although it has been dislodged and it is now under the horse instead of behind it. The chariot and the charioteer, they're gone, and they have been replaced by a fibula over the horse. That's the coolest part of the design. You know, a fibula was a piece of jewelry. Well, jewelry is not the right word. It was like a massive safety pin used to keep a cloak in place over the wearer's shoulders. We can only wonder how many different iterations of this design had to be made for a chariot to morph into something like that, like a piece of clothing. Fascinating design overall. Next, let's look at a stater issued by the Ambiani. This is a pretty emblematic type, called the Gallic War Stater. The Ambiani were another tribe from Gallia Belgica that was subdued by Caesar around 57 BC, but they seem to have been a bit more belligerent against Caesar if compared to the Suessiones we saw earlier. In the Battle of Alesia, the final siege that sealed the fate of Gaul, the Ambiani sent a contingent of soldiers to help Vercingetorix, and these were the kinds of coins issued to pay for the army. The main visual element that shows these coins must have been made during wartime and in a hurry, it's the lack of an obverse. As we can see, one of its sides is completely blank, something unusual for Celtic coins. Even their smallest denominations had an obverse and a reverse, but here we have nothing, just the flat, convex surface, and probably an imprint from the recipient this planchet sat on when it was being struck. As for the reverse, we once again have the horse. Very, very stylized horse we have here, with all parts of its body disjointed into separate parts. The entire design can be broken down into 3 simple shapes if you look at it. It has crescents, straight lines, and little dots. The shape of the horse is still somewhat distinguishable, but anything else has degenerated into a mass of dots. A particularly large number of these coins are found in Britain up to this day by metal detectorists, which implies a couple of things that could have been happening at the time they were made. First, there must have been a considerable amount of commerce between the Gauls and the Britons. The Gallic tribes must have relied heavily on the tribes of Britain for buying their supplies for war, and they might have even paid for mercenaries to cross the channel and fight. Or, and that's an interesting theory, after the war, many refugees fled to Britain, carrying their fortunes with them, and these were eventually dispersed amongst the local population. This last theory is quite plausible, in fact, as there was a considerable migration from Gaul to Britain during the Gallic Wars. And since I just mentioned the Celts from Britain, let's cross the channel and look at some of their staters. The southern coast of Britain had an important presence of migrants from the European mainland, particularly during the 1st century BC, due to the Gallic Wars, of course. This stater is from a tribe called the Belgae. And no, I'm not talking about the tribes from Gallia Belgica we just discussed. It is a British tribe called the Belgae. It's quite likely this was an entire tribe that crossed the channel and established themselves on the island. The species dated from around 80 to 50 BC, and it is remarkably similar to the coins from their cousins across the channel, the Ambiani that we've seen. For this coin, I'm going to start with the reverse, so we can see how similar this stater is to the continental pieces. It's almost like they operated the same monetary system. We once again have a horse broken down into simple shapes. This time, however, it is facing left, and there are some interesting little quirks in this die. Under the horse's mouth, there's something that looks like a little starfish, and under it, there's another weird wiggly shape, which I could only describe as like a heavily stylized crab. I mean, it's reasonable to think about a tribe that lives next to the sea featuring sea animals on its designs, right? Do you think it looks like a crab? And at the very bottom, although in this example it was left off-plan, we have a small floor with a diagonal pattern, probably a degeneration of the Greek legends that were once in this area. Now, on the obverse, we have Apollo once again. There has been some dramatic abstraction in this bust as well, but at least we can point out which visual elements copy which part of the original prototype. The first thing that calls my attention are these crescents on the right part of the design. These are probably degenerations of the eyes and the mouth of Apollo. To the extreme left, we have these striated patterns, which most likely represent the god's curly hair. At the center, a leaf-like pattern is clearly a reference to the laurel crown worn by Apollo. And finally, we have this curved line that goes from the crescent shapes to the middle of the design, which I think is what is left of the god's jawline. Okay, next we're gonna leave the coast and we're gonna head north, slightly inland, and let's look at a stater issued by the Trinovantes and the Catuvelauni. These were rival tribes that constantly engaged in war, but seem to have issued the same or very similar types of gold staters. I love this fact. In a way, it shows the dual nature of money. Despite these people being locked in bitter rivalry for centuries, and probably much of what stimulated these wars was for one tribe to take away the possessions of the other, when it came to commerce, the same type of money united them. It shows how underneath the political squabbles of the powerful, there must have been a willingness of its common people, its individuals, to just conduct trade and even have a common coin between them to facilitate this trade. That's what makes studying history through the lens of coins so cool. You can clearly see humanity's greedy and cruel intentions towards other nations and towards its own people sometimes manifest in its money. But you can also see instances of cooperation between peoples you thought were in total war. The states might have been at war, but the individuals, they were not. This coin was struck between 55 and 45 BC, around the time when Caesar tried to invade Britain. The obverse is yet another corruption of the Apollo type. In this case, we have another super dramatic case of Celtic abstract art transforming the bust of the Greek god into a mix of different shapes. There seems to be a remnant of the laurel crown crossing the design, but it looks more like a wheat stalk now. At the center, another set of parallel lines project up and down, breaking down the design into 4 sectors. The top 2 sectors have some sort of winged pattern, which could be the remnant of Apollo's curly hair, while the other 2 at the bottom, where his face would have been, seem to have reached total entropy. There's this chaotic pattern of straight and curved lines, giving us no clue as what the original design was. That's awesome. It's like abstraction taken nearly to its limits. On the reverse, once more we have the horse. This one is particularly well made in my opinion. Its musculature, it's all well represented, and he looks quite realistic in this pose, galloping to the right. You know, if compared to the super abstract obverse, it's surprising to see such a realistic reverse. Under it, we have once more that pattern that looks like a wheat stalk, probably replacing the Greek letters for the original name of Philip. There's also a series of circles around the design, filling out spaces that would otherwise be left empty. And finally, for a complete and total change from the previous coin, here we have a very late stater, struck by the Catuvellauni, between 10 BC and 43 AD, so this is a very late piece. And as we can see, a lot has changed in the half century that separates this coin from the previous. Gone is the heavy abstract art, being replaced with a simple, cleaner design. Only the wheat stalk from the original coin is left. And the biggest surprise, we have Latin letters. This piece was struck by a king called Cunobelinus. Some say he was a client king of Rome, others that he was simply an ally of Rome. It seems that Cunobelinus conducted a lot of trade with Rome, and his much cleaner looking coins seem to show a certain trend of Romanization on his part. The obverse has the legends Camu, which make a reference to the city of Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. And on the reverse, once again, the horse. Some things never change, but can we blame them? This design was used for so many centuries. Horses were a symbol of the warrior nobility that ruled the land, and since Cunobelinus traded so much with the Romans, well, the Romans had plenty of horses and chariots featured on their coins as well. So they even had the foreign coins with horses on them to draw an inspiration on. I like the little details on this reverse. There seems to be some kind of leaf being blown away with the wind above the horse, giving this design another visual element that seems to be moving. There's also some small pellets all over the field to fill out the design. And under everything, an abbreviation of the king, CUN, of Cunobelinus. After Cunobelinus died, his sons would start a squabble with Rome, which Emperor Claudius would exploit as an excuse to invade and take over the island, putting an end to native Celtic rule and to their coins, which would be replaced with the Roman monetary standard. Imagine how Celtic coins would evolve if they were given another 200 years to change and naturally evolve. Alright, now let me hear from you. Which kind of gold stater coin from the Celts is your favorite? Let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.